Welcome to our Purpose podcast. We are People and Purpose, dedicated recruitment professionals with deep roots in the HR community. We're here to help you prioritize people, along with a connection to your purpose. At People and Purpose, we believe that fulfilled people make successful companies. We're redefining recruitment by leading with purpose and empowering candidates and employers. We know your mindset matters, and once you master it, you can change your world. You can create the life you desire, build a successful career, and connect with your purpose for yourself, your family, and your community. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. You're part of a community of like minded individuals striving for personal and professional growth. Through our online courses, career coaching, and this podcast, we'll help you experience more freedom and fulfillment. Join us as we delve into a wide range of topics around generalist HR, L&D, Rem and Benz, industrial relations, OD, change management, HR technology, recruitment, and much, much more. By connecting with us on LinkedIn or Instagram, we'll keep you updated with new HR roles, thought leadership posts, industry discussions by subject matter experts, and updates on the HR market. There's always something new and interesting to learn with us. Subscribe now to invest in your future and career today with People and Purpose. And if you think anyone might enjoy this podcast, please share away. So, welcome to our Purpose podcast today, where we are going to be discussing how HR can navigate infidelity in their organization. So, today we have a vital and sensitive topic to discuss, and we are incredibly fortunate to be joined by an expert who brings a wealth of knowledge and unique perspective to the conversation. Our guest is Rachel Voysey, a registered psychologist and the founding director of the Relationship Room, Sydney. Rachel is deeply passionate about helping people connect meaningfully with themselves and others. And while she specializes in couples and relationship therapy, addressing critical issues like communication breakdown and relationships in crisis, she also has a particular interest and extensive experience in the critical immediate care of couples experiencing infidelity. Every week, Rachel works with many couples navigating the trauma, confusion, shame, and ambivalence that infidelity brings, helping them find meaningful outcomes with sensitivity, respect, and depth. Beyond her private practice, Rachel also works with corporations, sports teams, and other businesses to enhance communication and working relationships, exploring interpersonal dynamics that can limit performance and workplace culture. So, this makes her insights incredibly relevant to our discussion today. And in this podcast, we're going to delve into a challenging but crucial area for HR and people and culture professionals. Rachel, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm excited about this conversation today.
Me
A little bit
too.
spicy, a little bit fun.
It is, and really important as well because it happens a lot and it's very tricky, sensitive, and as you mentioned, an area that just has so many ripple effects. So I really
Absolutely.
appreciate being able to talk about it because it is just such an important area as well.
Yeah, and opening up the conversation and actually diving into a few different things because we've had a few questions coming in from
Mhm.
our community as well, which is really good. So we can answer them today confidentially, which is great.
Absolutely.
So to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit about the work you do with businesses outside of your practice and in particular with HR and people and culture?
Yeah, so it was probably an area that I kind of sidestepped into because I was getting so many referrals and inquiries, both from, HR as well as just people trying to find the right help that they weren't getting through referrals in their organization.
Yep.
And, a lot of the, leading businesses that I've worked with are really big on getting the specialized services for the tricky areas, which is, I think, so important, particularly in areas like this. So, some of the work I do is, I suppose, on the proactive side of trying to train and educate people more from a skills-based perspective of how to protect their relationships at home, because that's a really important part of how it can later come into work, right? How do we look after our relationships when we're under stress at work, when they're so important to us, so that we don't find ourselves feeling stressed and vulnerable at work. So I do that kind of work, which I really love because it's quite protective and proactive. But then I also do and kind of have got involved in the crisis management side that I've been invited into often through the HR, like contacts, people contact me to kind of get involved where they can't. I suppose what was put forward to me is that people had tried to use the resources they had, the EAP programs, trying to find the help that, that people needed. But unfortunately, because of the complexity, not just of infidelity, but of relationships in general,
Yeah.
sometimes that help just wasn't enough, I suppose, to support the people in the crisis, but also to support the organization and the culture, which is, of course, so important.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to work, though a lot of the time people involved in workplace relationships or affairs, they see them as personal. They really aren't. They really do become part of the organization. They can't really just be contained as personal because of the way they affect everybody at
Yeah,
work.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I've seen it from an outsider's perspective when it has happened in organizations, how it ripples through different teams and areas and secrecy and all sorts of different things. So, yeah,
absolutely.
it's important work.
Yes, yes, it definitely is. And it's been a really meaningful extra part of what I do.
That's really cool.
Mhm.
So, romantic relationships in the workplace can be tricky. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I think it's important. There's a distinction I always make here that, there's like work is a place a lot of people meet, that it always has been. So, there can be a lot of good things in workplace relationships too. Like people do have relationships at work. You can't really deny that, whether we agree or disagree, they happen. So that's a part of, how people form connections. And often people that have workplace relationships feel quite aligned on lifestyle, and they've got similar interests, maybe even similar personality types because they've gravitated to a certain type of profession or workplace. So there can be that really healthy part of, if they're managed well and there's not any crossovers on power lines or, those kind of dynamics that make them trickier. Workplace relationships can be good, I think, as long as they're handled with openness and transparency, and that you can maintain professionalism, which is, very important when you're just talking about general workplace relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you give us an example of where you've seen it go wrong and what had happened in that scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think most of the time where it goes wrong is, breakups are hard enough. It's often when the relationship goes wrong, or there's a blurring of professional boundaries at work. When I'm working, this is outside of affairs. This is probably more about just normal workplace relationships
Yeah.
where people are dating each other. Um, I think there can be too much personal behavior either inside work or just outside work in work events. It makes other team members uncomfortable. So there can be that kind of part of it where people aren't quite too sure how to approach a couple when they're at work. But I think the part where normally the wheels fall off is when, one or both people want to end the relationship and there are complicated feelings, and often other people in the workplace have kind of gotten involved. So workplace drama
Yeah,
starts off. And
definitely.
of
Yeah.
course, that workplace drama seems to trump productivity most of the time when those kind of things um, become part of a team. So I think when you're thinking about workplace relationships, you need to be really taking them slowly and trying to be clear on expectations, and actually more so than you would in a relationship outside of work, being able to discuss what happens if the relationship ends earlier than you might if it was a relationship outside the workplace.
And if there are those conflicts, and you can see that obviously there's that conflict between the two people breaking up, and then other team members are getting involved, as HR, how could you mitigate some of that risk, or what do you do to clean the mess up or help clean the mess up?
Yes, and this, I mean, again, I think this is probably where education is important, and to having some kind of proactive education on relationships in the workplace and out of the workplace so people have some language and support around it. But
Yeah.
then I also think having clear communication, not, you don't want to gaslight your team, kind of pretend it's not happening. You want people to be able to discuss if they have any complicated feelings around it, to be able to have clear lines of communication. And in terms of the people in the relationship, I think this is often when it is appropriate to engage maybe some either one-on-one or some kind of support service for the two people in the relationship. And that's when it's, I suppose, particularly messy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, and again, that's great because they get that support, but it's also good for the organization. I think that kind of thing done early really contains a messy breakup.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
then I guess so that was relationships in the workplace. Can you talk to us about why infidelity inside an organization can impact the culture, well-being, and performance?
Yeah, I mean, infidelity is tricky everywhere. I mean, that's probably why I've specialized in it both in the workplace and out. It is just one of the most moralized, intense reactions you will get from people is around betrayal. And that's for there's a lot of very strong reasons that come even out of evolutionary psychology about how betrayal makes us feel. So, infidelity most people will have very strong feelings to infidelity generally, let alone within the workplace. So, you know, I think what often happens with infidelity is it can be unknown to a team. And so there's kind of two situations I said. There's the ones where people kind of know or a few people know. And then there's the cases where very few people know, but there's a kind of feeling that something's off, which in
Mm,
itself creates these divisions within the workplace without anyone actually knowing what's going on. So I think, as we know, both inside an organization, which in systems work, an organization and a family are not that different. If you have a lack of trust, everything goes after it, right? So it is going to affect culture, performance, and ultimately it can lead to complete cultural change if it really blows out, depending at what level. Sometimes it's at the level of kind of an executive team or the C-suite. Other times it's, more just between staff members. But it's really important for us to focus on it as a trust issue that has ripples into the organization. And I think that's one of the things I try and talk to HR leaders about is you need to look at this as a trust issue. Trust is lost quickly and rebuilt slowly. So there needs to be lots of clear lines of communication to help manage a situation that occurs like this in a workplace. But of course, there's so many variables that come into that. Yeah,
absolutely.
depending on who's
Absolutely.
involved.
So, I mean, you just touched on what HR can do, like around building that trust again and that
Yeah.
foundation. What
Yeah.
else would you suggest if they came across something like this and it was breaking down?
Yeah, I think, well, some organizations have policies around it. This is another area that's will come up recently, again, probably more publicly, but are there policies around this? So I think that's an important thing to look at. And I mean, HR aren't there to police people's personal lives. They're there to protect the organization. So I think when they're approaching these issues and, if they do need to be conversations that, people aren't necessarily the people involved in the affair aren't coming to you, it might be important to approach them, but approaching them with the right attitude of we're not policing you, we're trying to protect the organization, work with you and help make sure that we get a good outcome here for
Mm,
you as well as everybody else involved. So I think the approach and that, we don't want it to come across straight away like it's a disciplinary action or a punitive action or that anyone's in trouble, because again, that's really not the role. And I think that approach can open up a lot of conversation very quickly.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, can you outline how to have healthy relationships within an organization?
Do you mean like the intimate kind of
Yeah.
relationships? Yeah. I think number one, transparency is key. People where there are secrets, there are problems. So I think being able to have that things are known in an appropriate way is
Yep.
very important. Um, I think being able to talk to other people if there are, I mean, I think sometimes when there are actually conflicts of power or crossovers where there's influence within teams, there might also at times be need like conversations around restructuring things so that those things don't actually contaminate the trust,
Yep.
and that there's any preferential treatment or people are feeling that, you know, things are unfair in the workplace. So I think those kind of things are really important.
Yep.
I think it all just starts with transparency. I think when people know what's going on, they immediately feel better. And I
Yeah.
think that's important.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay. So, what are some of the common misconceptions HR might have about addressing infidelity in the workplace?
I I think I mean, we're all human, right? So I think for when we're in these roles, it's also really important to acknowledge how it makes us feel and what our biases are. And this is where I just think a lot of things come up. I mean, working as a psychologist, I guess there's the conscious and the unconscious. And I think a lot of the times what I see is with the best of intention, some of those, personal biases are being brought into the way it's managed.
Mm.
So I think it's really important to, first of all, just kind of understand how you feel about it if you're in that role, and maybe getting some kind of mentoring or checking in yourself before you go in to actually start dealing with the situation. I think that's very important.
Yep. Yep.
And then I think, I think that once you know your kind of position on those things, people can also very well meaningly not want to be disruptive. So they, almost, you don't want to feel like you're then colluding with the affair, because if you're kind of protecting those people and then that transparency becomes, yes, but other people don't, then that creates a big problem within an organization, because now you're kind of colluding with the secret. So I think opening up lines of communication with other people is very important as well at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And are there any proactive steps that organizations can take to foster a culture that minimizes the negative impacts of workplace relationships, including potential infidelity?
Yes, absolutely. I think particularly on helping people understand how power skews our perspective, because a lot of the times it is between kind of people who are in superior and subordinate roles of some sort, not always with extreme differentiations in power, but I think helping people to understand that, power can skew the way you think you feel about things, and educating them, I suppose, on how some of these things that cause relationships to happen in the workplace might actually just be about the conditions in the workplace. Like we see a lot of people trauma bond when they're on extremely stressful projects, and they feel brought together by the stress and the trauma, and they can mistake that for a feeling of intimacy. So
Right.
that's one of the things I try and help people understand. There's also things that come out of psychology, like this idea of the exposure effect, that when you just see someone a lot, you tend to like them more.
Mm.
And that can be one of these things where, you can get confused about, do you really like this person, or is this just because you're working so closely with them that you almost start to develop, it's not that it's a false sense of intimacy, but it can be a false sense of desire. And desire and intimacy aren't the same. Intimacy
Yeah.
is kind of about closeness and
Yeah.
feeling like we're in this together.
Yep.
And that can feel like desire when it's not. So, again, helping people understand these things about what happens under stress, how we feel in a team, and also what makes healthy relationships. I think that kind of education, again, really helps people to see things differently. The same with, how, I mean, a lot of affairs start because people they have this kind of jokey relationship where they're sharing things as a bit of a joke, but they're not. And then that flips to sharing more vulnerable things, or things about their personal life that they maybe wouldn't share otherwise, which again is kind of a gateway into an intimate relationship. So I think helping people to understand about the different kind of dynamics of relationships at work sometimes helps them to see things differently and have more choices about, is this somebody that I really want a relationship with, or is this a reaction to the situation we're in together?
It's really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Like, I've never heard anyone like talk about it that way, like with the trauma bonding and things like that.
Yeah, it's huge. And even, I mean, there's another one that we talk about called um, it's it's basically like situational disinhibition, which is the idea that when you're, at work events or together, or maybe there's alcohol involved, or there's stress, or there's you're working late or traveling. Again, we kind of reduce our barriers to saying yes to things. We might become more impulsive. And one of the things that I bring in from my perspective is when we feel like we're falling into a bit of lust, our whole relationship with rational decision making changes. And that's very well proven. You can create a nasal spray that replicates what happens when you get a bit lustful, and you literally will make very erratic, very badly calculated decisions just because you're affected by these hormones and neurotransmitters. So, even helping people to understand that, a lot of things are sometimes happening that we don't understand, and they can be mistaken for desire when
Yeah.
they're really about other things like stress, tiredness, not coping, and trying to get our needs met in unhealthy ways. So
Yeah.
that, I find when I do that training with people, it really helps them to see things differently.
Yeah. So do you run workshops around that?
Yeah, I do. I
Yeah.
try to run workshops and make them quite specific, because I think everybody understands the premise that these things are there. But when it comes to kind of breaking it down into the components of, yes, what's really happening for you and how do you see it, I think that really helps people. And I marry that up in my training workshops with, also for people that are in relationships, and not just intimate relationships, so even family and friends. How do you have healthy relationships out of work so you don't have all these unmet needs at work that get confused with stress?
Yeah. Because it's all one big ecosystem, really,
It's
isn't it?
one, yeah, and I think that's where, that's one of the nice bridges, I suppose, is understanding the deeper things that relationships just really make us do different things. We act
Yeah,
very differently when we suddenly like someone, and as much as it would be nice to say that we can turn that off and always go into professional, it doesn't work like that. And, that's where I suppose policy and HR and the trickier part of,
yeah.
the human behavior stuff comes together well,
Yeah.
works.
Sounds like the monkey brain takes over.
Yeah, it does. It's fascinating. I suppose it's even in my private work. I say to clients, people say to me, but this isn't something I'm completely different in the way I handle problems at work, and I completely believe them on that because once you're in your relationship attachment brain, it's a kind of completely different operating system to where you sit when you're not in a relationship with someone. So it's a whole different playbook that switches on when you go into relationship brain versus everything else brain. So sometimes it can even be hard to understand why you're behaving that way.
Yeah,
And then if you bring in extra dynamics like power differentials, where there can be, you can think you're consenting, but it's a bit coercive because do kind of have these maybe some other issues around, um, you know, a lot it can actually go back to even like early caregivers where you seek approval of people in power, and suddenly you're not seeing that, but you're falling in love with the person above you.
yeah,
It's a really nuanced, tricky area, and I think that
yeah.
needs to be included when we deal with it.
Very much so. Wow, it's
Yeah.
super interesting. And when you do these workshops, do you typically like how many people are you doing it with, and what sort of level do you target it?
I probably do it differently for different levels. I mean, I think working with executive teams, I think the training I do is quite different because it's also around them understanding how power intersects with connection.
Yeah,
Because they are in positions of power, and very well-meaningly they can think that you don't necessarily see the effect you have when you're in those positions. So that when I'm working with executive teams or management teams, it's slightly different. And then when I'm working with teams of employees, I really I mean, I work with groups up to, 30, 40, 50 people
yeah,
because a lot of it I think is about, it can very much be a team training kind of event, but it can also be very specific,
yeah,
depending on what the organization needs.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's really good. Okay, so a question that came in from our community was what's the biggest truth about workplace infidelity that HR professionals might be afraid to acknowledge or discuss even amongst themselves?
Um, I think the thing that doesn't get acknowledged enough is how deep it runs. Like once people are in a relationships, they essentially function like addicts. So it's like you're trying to sometimes, if people are really deeply into an affair and we're trying to deal with it through policy and we're trying to manage it at a very superficial level, we might be ticking the right boxes, but we're not addressing the problem. And then unfortunately, often that ripple continues into the future and more problems arise. I think one of the things when people are deep into, they don't actually have to necessarily even be attached in relationships, just to say they're very much in the stage of lust and intensity. People are pretty much addicted to that state. So it's, trying to kind of deal with it just at a superficial, like containment level of has to stop and this is what we're going to do probably minimizes the problem. And I think that's where often we run into not treating it in the way that actually protects the organization because things continue,
Yeah,
and we haven't given the right support to the people involved. I think the right support helps them understand that
yeah,
it's a little bit trickier than that.
yeah,
So I think just not acknowledging the depth and complexity at times.
yeah. And have you seen that infidelity piece in an organization completely break down teams and then like come together and then bring it back? What's it like afterwards?
Absolutely, I have. You mean when both people stay and bringing it back?
Yeah,
Yeah, I absolutely have, but again, I think it's a long process because, as I said, whether inside the workplace or outside the workplace, trust is lost quickly and rebuilt slowly.
yep,
So I think again, you can't do this as, oh well, we'll just deal with this week and next week we'll pretend it's not happening. When I've seen that done well, it's because it's been handled at multiple levels with, making sure people feel reassured of what has happened, what it means for them, and how it's going to be handled going forward. And I think once it's all out in the open, most things can go well, but they really rely on HR to take the lead
yeah,
on the conversation. And otherwise, again, it kind of trickles down into little conversations of drama, and that's when, again, we might think we've cleaned it up, but it's not really
Yeah,
gone.
you can't sweep it under the carpet, can you?
No, and they're relying on us to keep that conversation alive
Yeah.
and not for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
when there's, like you said, it's been this, like you said, quite a big disruption and you're trying to restore the
Yeah.
culture.
So, just finally, like obviously, we've gone through a fair few different topics here. If someone wants to get in touch with you and talk to you about some of your programs within the organization or even privately, because I'm sure that there's people here that would benefit from your private support as well, can
Yes.
you tell us how they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, they can go through my practice, which is the relationship room. If you get in touch or look at our website, there's resources and contact there. Otherwise, I also have a personal website, which is rachelvoysey.com, which also has similar information. But yeah, I always say to people, it's just sometimes nice to even be on the desk of somebody in a role that sometimes that's how it happens is they just something happens and they
Yeah,
need that extra specialized support. And I'm really very flexible to stepping into that as well. So yeah, that's the best way to find me and
yeah.
always happy to help.
You'd be a good person to have in your corner if you're going through that situation, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's yes, I definitely it's a hard area, but it is a specialized area, so it is good
Yeah.
to, work. Yeah.
And it's nice to know that, like if people are experiencing that in their organization or they're going through something at the moment, that they're not alone either.
They're
So,
definitely not alone. And I think, the thing that has it that I probably haven't said today that I just think is worth mentioning too is that, you know, it's also affecting people outside the organization, like especially with affairs. There's the partners, there's the children, and there's, a whole lot of effects. So the people that are going through this, yes, when it's at work, it's doubly hard because they're risking, their livelihood and personal relationships at the same time. So I also think having compassion for people going through these situations, because a lot of people find themselves in affairs that never thought they would be in an affair.
yeah.
A lot of people say to me, I was anti-affairs. I never thought of this. I can't believe I've done this. So I think the moralizing and the judgment, it's a trauma of sorts, and we need to treat it like that and give that support to people, not make them feel, judged and speculated upon because they really need support.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's such a like empathy. You've delivered that beautifully.
Okay.
And is there one piece of final advice that you'd like to leave today?
Um, I think actually it's probably that of like, have an open mind, treat it with empathy and compassion, but also I suppose, particularly for people in in HR is, you know, remember that this is about working together. It's not about, it's not trying to police. You're not responsible for what people do outside of work, but we are responsible for protecting the organization. So I think that we need to remember that when we're dealing with these situations.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to chat.
Yeah, thank you. We will talk soon.
Thank you.